This exercise is going to be working with transformations. And transformations in Photoshop is selecting a part of an image or taking a whole image and changing either the scale or the rotation or the orientation, so flipping it or mirroring it. And then later on in another exercise, we're going to look at more advanced transformations. But we're going to be starting with these basic scale, rotate, and move around. And what transformation operations are really great for is creating 2D collages. And collage is a technique that a lot of artists work with, both contemporary artists and then artists previous to now, the present day. Collage came out of a group of artists known as the Dadaists, or Dadaism. That was the movement that they were associated with. And these were primarily artists in Europe who were working after World War I. So starting in the 1920s and going up until the 1930s when Dadaism started to shift into a couple of different movements that we're going to be going over. And so we're going to be going over the specifics of this technique and also this movement and how the two are really tied together. But the basic idea is that collage was taking these visual representations of civilization, looking at photographs and also advertisements at the time, and then subverting the image and deconstructing the image, combining images that didn't necessarily fit together. And this was coming out of this idea that civilization had produced the World War I, which was a horrible, violent war that affected millions and millions of people across the world. And so this group of artists were basically saying, if civilization produced World War I, then we want to deconstruct or kind of challenge what civilization is. And so they were looking at these images that were considered high art or just these beautiful images and destroying them or subverting them or changing them and transforming them. And so this is a great way to start to learn how to use transformation operations in Photoshop. And it's also a great way to start to understand the technique of collage. So the artwork that you see here on the right is actually a collage piece that was from the 1920s. Looks like it's 1924. It's by Hannah Hawk, who was a Dadaist artist, and she is one of the founding artists who started working with collage. So these techniques that we're going to be doing, and this is something that seems, I think, very almost like it's just, you know, you never think that this is something that was invented, but when she started doing this in the 1920s, this was not something that was being done either by artists or really by anybody who was working with images. So this is definitely this was a new technique at the time, and it's very radical. And I really think it's important to stress the idea that collage has these very subversive, radical roots. Okay, so for this exercise, I'm asking you to take at least 3 different self-portraits, and probably with using different expressions or different scales potentially, but at least 3 different self-portraits that you've taken and combine them into one collaged image. So right now I'm going to be working from this image here, but then I also wanted to show you that I have all my other images open in Photoshop, and that's a good place to start. So the first thing I want to do, and I'm going to be actually looking at this piece here as a guide, just because it gives me a little bit of direction to go with. You don't necessarily have to do this, but it will benefit you to try and keep it simple and at least to have some idea with what you're trying to do when you're combining everything together. So the first thing I want to do is that I know that I want this to be something that is more graphic. So the photo elements I'm going to want to make black and white, and then I'm going to want to add my own areas of color to those. So I'm going to, at least starting with this base image, I'm going to turn it black and white. So I'm going to go that. And that was the shortcut Command Alt Shift and B. It's also under Image Adjustments. And then I think I'm going to leave color on most of these and then decide, and I might leave the color on one of these. So for now, oops, I just closed that one. For now, I'm just going to be working with this image. So the first step with transformations is very simple, is you have to make a selection usually to start with a transformation. There's a couple things you can do to transform your entire image, and that if you go to edit, oh, it won't even let you do that. Never mind. So for instance, if I select the entire image, so I just did Command A, and then I go down to edit and then transform, you see you can do things like flip it. And again, this is all under the transform. I can turn it vertical. And then I can also, using the free transform, which is Command T, and that's also under the edit menu. If you go to free transform, you get these little, this is the bounding box that's surrounding the selection that you've made. And what you can do with these handles is if you hold down on them, you can adjust things. So right now I'm adjusting the scale, and you'll see that when I am shrinking it down, that I'm not making the entire image smaller, and I'm just getting the background that I have set on the canvas right now, which is black. So this is a little bit of a less ideal way to make transformations. So I'm going to exit out of there. So to get out of the free transform tool, you just press escape if you don't want to keep the changes, or enter if you want to keep the changes. And we're going to do this several times. So I'm going to keep reminding you of that. So the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to try and focus on my face right now, because I know that I want to transform that. So I'm going to make a selection, and I have my profile selected. And I'm going to, again, go to either edit and then select free transform, or Command T. And then once again, I'm going to show you some of the things that you can do once you have an area selected. So when you're not selecting a rectangle and you're selecting a more complex object, you're still able to do the same types of operations that you would when you have the rectangle selected. It just basically does the same thing to whatever abstract shape or polygonal shape you have selected. And I'm also running into the same problem where I'm getting this shadow that's actually just black pixels that are being filled in as I'm changing this selection. And what's happening here, and this is because this is all on one layer. So if you look over in the Layers tab, I'm still working in my background. And as I am making edits to this, it's filling in the background with black, and that is because that's what it's set to do. So again, not super ideal unless you're trying to work with that original silhouette, but there are other ways to do that that might work a little bit better as well. So I'm not happy with this transformation, so I'm going to escape. And now, instead of first transforming, I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to go Command C. It's also under the edit menu, and then I'm going to paste it. And what has happened now is I have another layer here, and I'm going to change this name by double clicking on the name, and I'm just going to call it Face 1. And I'm going to move this around, and you can see that now on top of the background layer, which includes my face, I have another layer that I copied and pasted into its new layer. And once you have something in a layer and you have other transparent elements around it, you can then transform the layer. And if you so for instance, I'm going to hit Command T, and it fits the bounding box to the size of that layer. So if you just copied and pasted from like another layer and made a new layer with whatever you copied and pasted, you know that there's nothing else in that layer. So instead of having to redraw that bounding box or reselect everything, you can just make sure you have the layer selected, and then go to edit, free transform, or again, Command T. So now I'm going to play with the scale here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink this down a little bit, and when I hold down Shift and then drag these handles, that keeps everything in proportion. And then if I don't want things to be in proportion, I just don't hold down shift, and then it lets me scrunch things or pull things as much as I want. So I'm gonna hold down shift again, just to make sure to go back to the original proportion. And then I'm actually going to just shrink my face just a little bit here. All right. And then I'm going to isolate that just so I can have a better view of this layer that I'm in. And I'm going to cut this in half. So I've made a selection around half of my face, and then I'm going to hit delete to delete just that part. And then I'm going to unhide the background layer. So now I have this very almost the same copy of the background below, but it's on a new layer, and I've also changed the proportions slightly. And you can see, even just as I'm moving it around, you still have the sense of what my photo image looks like and what the self-portrait originally looked like, but there's this slight discrepancy that's going on. There's this slight deconstruction of the image. And again, this is part of collage. And another thing to remember as you're working on collage is that a big part of collage is that it is evident that there was some kind of edits done to the image, that there was some kind of manipulation, that there was this sense of subverting the image, changing the image, transforming the image. And you want that to be obvious if, again, you know, this is part of the intention of that, but because this is such a big principle of collage, I'm not trying to make this look photorealistic. We went over that in a previous module, in a previous exercise. I'm actually trying to make these changes. I'm trying to have them all develop a sense of identity, or, you know, a sense of a portrait, but it's going to be less about what exactly I look like and more about the combining of these different photos into one single image. And to do that, for this particular exercise, I'm not really worried about looking exactly like one of the photos. Because again, I'm trying to play with this image. I'm trying to go in and say, this isn't exactly how it has to be. I can change this and I can make this look how I want it to. So another thing that you can do with transformations is you can rotate things. And I am going to, again, go to Command T. And now instead of actually dragging this handle, I'm going to move my cursor slightly off of it, and then you see how it changes to that curve with the two arrows on the either end, and that actually lets me rotate. So I'm going to rotate that a little bit, and then I'm going to copy and then paste again. Oops. I'm going to select all on face one layer, copy, and then paste. And what that will do, if you have areas that are transparent, you don't need to only select the areas that are pixels. Even if you have an entire rectangular marquee around the whole layer, it'll only select the area that has the pixels in it. So I'm going to go in this again. I'm going to adjust the scale slightly. I'm going to press enter, and there we have it again. So again, we're starting to get the sense of it's a very different looking self-portrait than what we started with. And there's this sense of it being fractured, and there's the sense of this shift happening, and it is deconstructing that first image through transformation. So now I'm going to go and add I'm going to add part of my mouth to this. So I'm going to only do this with one image just to show how to do it. But for this exercise, I want you to be adding in at least 3 different images together. So I know I want to select this part of my mouth, and I want to combine that with the image that I'm working on. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to paste it. And then actually, I really like the way that that angle matches. but maybe I want to change a little bit here. So I have a couple of different options. I can hide these 2 layers and even hide this layer and then draw some kind of selection based on where my face is below. So let me try that first. So I'm going to try and roughly fit my mouth that I just copied and pasted from the other image onto this part of my face. So then I'm going to go back up here. Okay, so it looks like that's mostly within the boundary. There's a tiny little bit that's sticking out, but that's not really going to change anything. So this seems pretty good. Another thing that I can do is I can continue to transform this within this layer. And one thing to be aware of, though, is that if you try to enlarge something beyond the size that it was when you brought it into Photoshop, you're going to start to get pixelation. And as it gets to a point where it becomes distracting. So it definitely, you want it to be something that you're aware of, so that you can decide to make those images lose resolution because you want them to, or you can just be sure. If you're wanting to, for instance, if I wanted to make my entire forehead the size of my mouth, or if I wanted to make this mouth fit in to my forehead, and I didn't want it to be pixelated when I expanded it, then one way to do that would be to just take a more close-up photo originally of my mouth. Okay, so I'm actually going to have this be part of my hair. So I'm going to hide these, go back to that base image, and then I'm going to use the quick selection tool to draw a selection around my hair. Oops, it's not quite where I wanted all that to go. All right, so then I'm going to show these again. And so now that I have the selection made using the bottom layer, I'm going to then select the layer that has the teeth on it, and I'm going to invert the selection. So this way, this is going to delete everything that isn't within my hair. So I'm going to delete that, and then I'm going to Command E to deselect. So now I have this mouth form that is heavily transformed from the original portrait, and it's taking up part of my hair, and I want to combine the two a little bit more. So I'm going to making sure I have this layer selected. I'm going to do Command Option Shift B to make only that layer black and white. Adjustments are only applied to one layer. So if you're working with an image that only has one layer, that's why the adjustment will apply to the entire image. However, if you're working with multiple layers, it will only apply it to the layer that you have selected. So I'm going to say OK. And then I think I'm going to want this to multiply so it kind of combines with my hair, and that isn't really making a lot of sense. It's getting kind of muddled, I guess because my hair is super dark. So then I'm going to go and actually maybe just adjust the opacity here. All right, so now I have some interesting teeth hair, and I'm going to go back to that selection. And then I'm going to make a new layer. And then using that selection, I'm going to add some color. And this again, this is me adding color to these black and white photographs that are heavily transformed. And this is bringing out more of the graphic nature that I'm looking for. And then I'm going to multiply that. Okay, I'm going to show all of these. And then I'm going to move this up so that it's actually sitting on top of all of the different hairs. So hopefully you're starting to see how you start to use very simple transformations to really deconstruct and combine different images, and to develop a very visually interesting collage self-portrait that maybe, so this is something that has a depth of information and a depth of meaning to it. So instead of it just being an image of your face in the way that a camera captures your face, and you're not really adding adjustments to any of the levels in terms of the color balance, this is more editing and directly transforming the images that you captured and then recombining them. So this is really getting into developing images using photos as a base layer or as these base foundation images, but then developing whole new images and whole new composite images from these different inputs that you're bringing in. And you can continue to do this, and again, so you're going to be combining 3 different portraits or 3 different photos of your face into one, and then also adding color to this. So another thing that you can do, once you have these transformed layers, you can select them. So when you have the cursor sitting over the thumbnail and you hold down Command and click, it will select those layers, and then you can easily add color. So I'm going to add in a new layer. And then let's do this in a blue. And you probably want to start renaming these layers as you're adding them, because it's gonna get confusing really quickly. And there you see how that you can start adding color and start using the different transformed shapes that you've cut out to, again, add color to specific areas. All right, so I think I'm going to stop here. Make sure to save this as a Photoshop file and then follow the posted instructions to export and submit. And I believe that this is going to be used for a future exercise. So again, make sure to save that Photoshop file with those layers.